Hello, everyone, and welcome to Bridge to the Galaxy. Today, we have Eesha Patel as our special guest. So, Eesha, why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Hi, everyone. Tanys, thank you so much for having me on here. So, my name's Eesha. I am a galactic contact expert. I have spent the last decade of my life researching everything I can get my hands on about galactic intelligence, galactic consciousness, many forms of non-human intelligences. And I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation to bring a bit more, I guess, reality to this idea that I think for a lot of people is very far-fetched. And so I just want to ground it in, and hopefully today we can have a conversation around my work, what the Alliance is doing, and just kind of free flow from there.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I think that there's a lot of synergy between what the Alliance for Extraterrestrial Diplomatic Contact does and what you do on an individual in your individual practice, we'll say, or your individual work. So tell us
Yeah.
a little bit about what you do with the ETs.
So there's a few different roles that I have. One of them is more on the diplomatic side of things. You can call it ambassadorial duties, and that's something I've had for a number of years that I'm stepping more into now because I'm very aware that that sort of role is becoming a lot more necessary for the way that things are moving and the momentum that's really building up at the present time. So there's the ambassadorial side of things, and then there's the more educational and contact level side of things, which is teaching people how to make contact. Now, most of my work is done with visionary leaders. I tend to work with a lot of CEOs, entrepreneurs, leaders of communities. I feel like, and this is where I feel very, I guess, aligned to work in, is that if we can teach the leaders of these communities how to do that, they can then disseminate their knowledge and their experiences throughout their communities. So I've been on a mission for the last 10 years or so to work with a lot of coaches, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of healers, and just leaders in many forms to teach them how to make contact. And one of the biggest pieces that I feel very passionate about is acknowledging this idea that disclosure, whatever that means for many people,
Mhm.
this contact, this open contact, or this first contact is your choice. So you get to initiate contact if you choose to. You get to have that intention. You get to find pathways and follow pathways to facilitate that for yourself. So that's really what my work is about. I like teaching people that, first of all, it's a possibility. Second of all, the pathway to actually do that. And then the other element, as we mentioned, is this arm of what does that actually mean for people? What does it mean for the planet at a bigger level? What systems do we need? What legal frameworks are going to be required? How do we actually facilitate this on a global level? That's not just, individual people having experiences here and there, but really going, okay, you know what, this is a real phenomenon. There's enough evidence out there. So how can we now facilitate this at a mass level so there is this official first contact that can happen between humans and extraterrestrials?
Yes, and I think it's becoming more evident that, there is a lot of contact happening on a regular basis. But like you say, it's with individuals. It's not like your official contact or your official meetings, between like the Federation, Galactic Federation and our world leaders. So I think that, that's certainly something that the Alliance is aligned with as well in terms of creating that framework for diplomatic conversations. And so you mentioned that. So what has some of your work entailed in terms of the frameworks that you see as being of most importance at the moment as we move into this new time?
That's a really great question. So one of the papers I've been working on is a framework that can be given to community leaders of many varieties, whether that be in business, community, governmental levels, that gives them a formal framework of how to disseminate the knowledge, particularly in a way that is going to be digestible to the public. The news, this particular news that, you know, there is life, there is extraterrestrial life, and these beings are visiting Earth, I feel is not always the most easily received by the average person in the public, because of the fact that, you know, humans are creatures of habit. We have known life to be a certain way for many, many, many generations. And other than, you know, some indigenous cultures who have carried this knowledge through their lineage, the majority of the population, particularly in the Western world, is of the opinion that there's nothing else out there. And there's, you know, a lot of scientific rhetoric and theories out there from, you know, things you might have learned in school, Darwinian theory, things like that, that suggest that it's just us and we've just evolved here and there's nothing else out there. And so if you've grown up your whole life thinking that we're humans, we are the most intelligent species in the vicinity for as far as our eyes can see to the stars and beyond, is suddenly that paradigm gets shifted. One of the first things that actually is going to happen is it's going to disrupt the human identity of who we think we are. So what I have is a framework to address that. It's the paper that every organization needs, with a framework that they can implement with tools, techniques, practices, conversations that people can be having, so that this isn't such a big disheveling sort of experience. It's really with the intention that when this news comes out at a big scale, that people can digest it, that there are frameworks to address it, there's psychological support. All of those things need to come into play so that this shift can happen in the smoothest, easiest way possible.
Well, and I think that it's, you know, we've started the conversations in terms of diversity training, for instance, in the workplace. And I think this just takes that extra step, right? It's they're going to look different, right? They'll act different. They have different ways of being. So in terms of diversity, I mean, that we have that within our cultures as it is. Cultures are very different. We all look different because everyone's an individual. And so as we work through the diversity framework that we already have, I think it's a way to build on that and sort of seamlessly try to bring that in as things happen. I'm certainly a believer in divine timing. And so I kind of think that that will happen as it's meant to, you know, in terms of bringing it to the workplace. So I think what you're doing in terms of that must have some kind of a framework around that, around diversity, acceptance, and that sort of thing. Is that the direction that you're speaking about when you're bringing?
Yeah. Diversity and acceptance, I feel like, is the bit that comes after the identity shift. And the way that I've kind of seen it is, the first thing that's going to happen is people are going to think, who am I? Before they're even ready to accept them, before they're even ready to have a diversity conversation,
Yeah.
there has to be a conversation around, now who am I? Because identity is so important for our sense of stability in the world. And, you know, if your identity is you're a mother, you're a sister, you're a child, you're a CEO, you have all these identities. You could be, you know, a member of a religious group, whatever things you have around you that form your identity. They're always placed in the context of the fact that you're a human being on Earth in the country that you're born in. Those things all form your identity. And what's taken for granted at the moment in identity is this idea that humans are the most intelligent species on the planet and beyond. And so we don't talk about this. You know, when you go to school, like I remember when I was in school, we learned about, who am I, what is my identity, and we never put on there, well, I am a human being on planet Earth, because that's a given. It's a given, and everyone's like that, so there's no need to even mention it. But what happens when suddenly there's other races? Well, now it actually adds a level of identity, because the same way that you might have a cultural identity, you now have an Earth identity, which you thought everybody now, you know, everybody has, but suddenly you realize you're a subset, you know, considering every other race out there. So that conversation actually comes first before we even touch upon diversity. Once you acknowledge who you are within the context of the greater awareness of the existence of other races, the next step after that is, okay, how can we include them? And even before that, after the identity shift, then actually I suspect will be a deepening of the legal frameworks. Then there's going to be a dissemination of this knowledge through various industries. And my prediction of that is it will go something like this. So we have this announcement that this exists. First thing that happens is person likely potentially has this identity crisis, like, oh my God, who am I? Everything I thought isn't real. This is just such big news. There's an initial shock to that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the piece that needs support. Now, let's say, okay, you adopt this framework, all the organizations, they help the people through this identity shift. Then what happens is, okay, let's just say, yes, these beings do exist. Whether or not you're at the stage of accepting them as your own, like what we're doing with other diversity trainings, there is still going to be an element of, and this is just human nature, if they exist, what can we gain from this? And so there's going to be this phase that people go through where they go, okay, fine, they exist. I might not accept them as being like us. They're still the other. They're, we're the humans and they're the galactic beings. So there's still an otherness to that. But is there a cooperation there? So we haven't yet embraced them as all of us being one yet, but there's still an acceptance to some degree that there's us, there's them. What can we do there? Can we have a conversation? Can we learn something from them? Do they have technologies for us? Most likely, my prediction is that the first thing that will happen will be in the military side of things. There will be some exchange of technologies. Governments will definitely be very interested in that. The next one that I see happening will likely be around medical. So medical technologies, healing technologies, conversations to that degree. And somewhere in that vicinity, whether it's in the same order or happening simultaneously, then it's going to be agricultural. So how can we utilize their technologies to solve world problems like poverty or growing of crops? How can we learn from the experiences of other races, how they've managed to feed their entire population and create a society where there is no poverty, where there is no hunger, where there is no shortage of food anywhere in the world. And I just want to say, I'm very aware that we don't actually have a food shortage. What we have is a distribution shortage. There's enough food to feed the entire globe. And yet, if some of those issues were resolved and we were able to learn from these races, then suddenly what happens is then a societal shift. And so that's kind of how I see this playing out. I do see the military getting first dibs. I feel like that's very likely going to happen. And then it will filter through medical industries and then agricultural industries and then, other scientific, technological advancements and many other things will come as a result of that. And then I think somewhere along that pathway, alongside that will then be this diversity and acceptance of going, okay, maybe they're not really the other, maybe they are similar to us. And then there's a greater embracing of our sameness, our likeness, much the same that we've had historically with Indigenous peoples, people of different races, and so on.
So how do you think that the current disclosure project with Stephen Greer, how do you think that is going to be playing into this first contact? What's your theory on that?
That's a really great question. And so I have to say, I'm not overly familiar with Greer's work. I've not attended any of his events or anything like that. So anything I say is just coming from the few little tidbits that I've seen on the news, on social media. I think what he's doing is amazing. I think he has a great vision, and some of his messaging from what I've seen is very similar to mine, in that humans can initiate contact. That's what CE5 is, right?
That's right.
Human initiated contact. And so I think it plays a really big role, whether it's Greer's work or many other people out there that are facilitating this in their own ways. there is this movement, this impetus now to go, you know what, we're not going to wait for the government to officially tell us anything. What if I just went and did it myself? And this is where I actually love some of what Avi Loeb says. He's just his philosophy around it, that the skies aren't classified, and I think, well, that's perfect. You can't really own that. So if we empower ourselves, if we stop relying on someone else to give us some official disclosure or validation, can we have that for ourselves? And my answer is yes. I had my disclosure about 10 years ago. So if you ask me, I know for a fact that these beings exist. I've had contact with them, and I know that this is a very real phenomenon. So even if, some member of the government came to me and said, oh no, there's no such thing, I'd be like, well, that's great, but I know otherwise. So in that perspective, I think there are a lot of people out there who have had disclosure already. The question is, at what point will it gain enough momentum for it to be something official? And I don't have the answer to that. What I do know is what I'm seeing in the media. Even just this morning, I saw an article from SETI that the question is no longer, are we alone, but just how crowded is it out there? And I really like that because we're shifting away from is this even a possibility to actually, yes, but let's really get the full scope of this. And I think that's where the conversation is starting to head now.
It's lovely to see that progress, really, right, towards that, because even 5 years ago, we've come so far, even in the last 5 years, in terms of our understanding and the growth of society acceptance around it. It's beautiful to see that it's coming out like that. And I think a lot of the conversations that are happening in the US, in the hearings, are helping to push that envelope just a little bit more, and we get more and more, and then there's more and more sightings, of course, and interactions, that people, with the internet, I mean, we can't hide that stuff, right? They can't hide that stuff when you have stuff on the internet. So
Exactly.
I think that's beautiful. So that you mentioned the CE5. What do you know about that in terms of a project? Is your methodology similar?
I don't know, as I said, I don't know a lot about Stephen Greer's work, and largely it's because the way that contact happened for me, it was a very personal experience. And so a lot of the ways that I teach and the modalities that I teach have come through my own connections with these beings. I was very pleasantly surprised a few years down the track of doing my work to realize that others were out there doing this at such a big scale. But I'm not actually familiar with the Stephen Greer CE5 protocols. What
Okay.
I do know from my experience is that it's very frequency based. So when we talk about galactic consciousness or connecting with non-human intelligences, the way that I've experienced it is, it's firstly, there's an intention to do that. And I believe this correlates with some of Stephen Greer's work as well. So there's always an intention. And that's why it's a very intended contact, not just something that happens spontaneously. Even though some people have spontaneous experiences, a lot of the work that I do is very intentional. So
Mhm.
I in my line of work, I teach people how to connect. And the first thing I say to them is, you need the intention. You have to be open to it. You have to be available to it. So that's first and foremost. And then once that intention is in place, it's really then about what is the process by which you can tune into that frequency. And I think there are many modalities that work just equally fine in this regard. I know with Stephen Greer, I believe he uses some tones, and he's got an app that has some meditations or something. So I think there's a lot of valid modalities in that. The pathway that I use is the one that I was taught many years ago, and that was through working with a very specific meditation technique that allowed me to open up my consciousness, which then allowed that communication to come through with intention.
Beautiful. That's great. So what are the other aspects that you're working on in terms of the political, the diplomatic part of things? Because you mentioned a framework around some of that stuff as well.
Yeah, the main framework I'm working on at the moment is that first piece around the identity shift. I think
Yes.
that needs to be addressed first, and I feel like that's a really long document that I'm researching and putting stuff into, and it's taken quite a bit of time to pull it together as a proper thesis. But I know I'm aware that there are a lot of other people out there that are also contributing to this. And the intention is, once I've completed this first section that I'm working on, that I'll then be reaching out to experts in the fields of exopolitics and this level of legal framework for this, so that we can start including this in this document as well. And I see that perhaps there could be some synergy with the Alliance here as well, because I know that the Alliance, from what I've heard, has some of these frameworks already in place. So likely what will happen is, my mind and the minds of others in the Alliance will come together and will create something that has all of these pieces in there. The end vision for this is a collaborative document that just has all of these different facets in it. So there's the social facet, there's the identity facet, there's the legal frameworks, there's the political sort of documentations. I know you guys are working on the embassy, so a lot of that will come into it as well. It's looking at this from a variety of different angles, so that when it happens, there is a very clear pathway for the ETs to walk. And why I think this is so important is because if there wasn't a framework and they suddenly just rocked up out of nowhere and made this mass sighting for everyone, I think it would potentially instigate a war. And that is the last thing that anyone needs. So if there is already a legal framework in place, what it does is it actually gives them protection from being shot down, from being asked to leave, from whatever other things that might happen. If humans know that this framework exists, then suddenly there's a peaceful pathway for this contact to happen. And that's why having these frameworks ready is such an important piece of this official contact actually occurring.
And the part of the work of the Alliance with the behind the scenes anyways, is to hopefully offer some change objectives for things like the Geneva Convention, so that we can change that to include some peaceful contact. And I think there are many groups working on this. I know, but Kevin Briggs is working on a protocol as well to bring forward for that kind of purpose. And so there's a bunch of experts, and I would love to see all the experts sort of come together, and put together a document like what you're referring to, because there's so many wonderful, intelligent minds working on this project, and I think that's part of the Alliance's mandate. It's really to sort of bring some of these people together as well. And all of us have a united front in terms of going forward diplomatically and with the exopolitics part of that, and having a shared understanding, right, amongst all of those that might be working on it in their own personal ways. So what's the most passionate part for you in all of this? What do you feel most passionately about? What excites
Most passionate?
Yeah,
The
great.
moment when the starship lands and I get to go on board.
Awesome.
I've always said, it's one of it is my number one life goal to be there when it happens. That's it. The moment when this official thing comes into place and the starship lands and Commander Ashtar walks out of that starship, I want to be there. So that's probably a huge part of my motivation right there. Just from that perspective of I want to have that experience as a human on the planet.
Yeah.
Aside from that, it's really, what really lights me up is firstly these sorts of conversations. I love jumping on interviews, podcasts. I've done a lot over the years to get this voice out there. And the other thing that really, really lights me up as well is just watching people have their first connection, which I see with my clients all the time. I've got a course that I run, and that program includes these processes by which you can learn to connect. So it's just, watching that client for the first time go, oh, wow, I finally connected with Ashtar today,
Yeah.
and going, okay, great. Like, so now it's not just me talking about it, it's other people having these experiences. And that's where I get a lot of joy as well, because with each person that awakens, I feel like we're getting that little inch closer towards this mass sort of contact and revelation that we're going to have.
Well, and each piece that we all bring gets put into the collective consciousness, right? And so there's more and more of it in the collective consciousness. And those little light bulb moments that we have with our clients, they help just buoy all of that in the collective. And yeah, it's pretty fun when you see people connect for the first time. So I, like you, am looking forward to meeting Commander Ashtar. I have had telepathic conversation with him, and so meeting him would be absolutely amazing. So
in the flesh, not just
yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It's lots of fun stuff to look forward to, I think, in this journey.
Yeah.
So tell us about your story. How did you get into all of this?
So I went through a really big sort of life transition change, as these things tend to happen. Around 2015 is when it all kind of kickstarted. And as a result of that, that's when I first started having contact. I mean, some people would call it like an awakening, or just a moment of awareness, you know. And I can't say that I was really looking for it. I am one of those people that just overnight suddenly had this revelation come to me. So it was very sudden and very sort of just one night I woke up and there it was, you know.
Mhm.
So the first group of beings, galactic beings, that came through to me was the actually Arcturian Council of Light. And I also had a Pleiadian elder by the name of Elmira who approached me. And those initial conversations were very just introductory. Hey, we're here. Hi, don't freak out, you know, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
But very quickly from that point on, my mission to do this work, really, it just came online. The first thing that I received was from the Arcturians, who I know are very, very good at healing. They are the master healers of the universe. They
Yeah.
have a lot of technologies for healing and awakening. And so they showed me a series of sacred geometry codes that would telepathically get sent to me. And they told me to draw these codes. And then they told me to share these codes. And that was at a point where I had no experience in facilitation. I hadn't trained in even in teaching meditation. I had my own practice, and I think that was one of the things that allowed me to receive this connection, because I was practicing the Merkaba light body activation technique on a daily basis. So by doing that, I had expanded my consciousness to be able to receive these connections. And then when these connections came through, they gave me more sacred geometries to work with. And within about 5 weeks of me having this initial experience, I was then told to run this event. So I got a group of people together, and we had 7 people in the room. And this was me not knowing if it was going to work, not knowing if I was going crazy, like couldn't even verify where this information was coming from. All they said to me was, we are the Acturians, here are these codes, share them with people. You know,
And how
it
old
wasn't
were
a lot.
you? How old were you?
That was 25 then.
25. Okay.
Or yeah, probably not even 25, like probably, yeah, 24. So yeah, so I shared these codes. I had 7 people come to my very first event that I held in Perth. And then 3 people in the room actually telepathically connected with the Arcturian starship from the codes that I presented. So we sat there, we meditated on them. Like I said, I had no facilitation experience whatsoever. I just kind of said, everybody take some deep breaths, visualize the codes, and off you go, yeah, so that was validation for me, because I hadn't really told them much. When I shared these codes, what I got told was that they are DNA activation codes, and they're to do with the activation of 12-strand, actually 13-strand DNA, which has the 144 substrands plus the connection to the 0 point, which is essentially a code for, I want to say immortality, but it's a little bit more complex than that. So it's the immortality of the light body. So when I was given these sacred geometries, they said to me that these geometries will activate these various strands of the 12-strand DNA. So I just told them that's what it was. I said, we're doing a sacred geometry DNA activation ceremony, and I gave very little information about, what it was, where I got it from, and all of that. And yeah, so when 3 people in the room connected with one of the codes, and that code was a very typical Arcturian blue triangular sort of geometry. So when 3 people in the room saw the Arcturian starship telepathically and had that shared experience, that was validation for me to go, okay, I need to continue on with the work. So
Mhm.
that's really how it started. I mean, I can fast forward a little bit. This was many, many years ago now. But that then led to me starting a business, teaching regular meditation classes. I had a brick and mortar studio in Perth, like a wellness studio. That then evolved into an online coaching business. I created my healing modality, Origin Activation, where I train facilitators how to connect and use these connections for healing purposes. And then if we fast forward to 2024, I'm now being asked to leave some of that healing and coaching to the side to step more into ambassadorial duties, which is what brings us to this conversation today.
Yes, and that's one thing that we share. We've both met with Commander Ashtar and had the conversation, shall we say, about being ambassadors. And
Yeah.
so it's quite an honor, I think, for myself anyway. I feel it's quite an honor to be involved in this. Obviously, our souls agreed to this way before we came down.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so it's pretty amazing that all of this has happened. And there's no accidents, right? I mean, all of that happened to you for a reason. So it's led you to where you're meant to be, right?
Oh, absolutely. And, even though it was challenging at the time, just to give you a little bit of the context around what was going on for me back then. So I was in a relationship, and then we broke up, and the back end of the breakup was then the catalyst for everything else that unfolded. So, it was one of those situations where I was going through a lot emotionally.
Mhm.
And I think in some ways that probably left me more open to receiving some of these connections, because I was ready, I was available, I was on a clean slate. I feel like I finally left everything in my life behind that wasn't working, and I mean, on some levels I knew, okay, this relationship isn't good for me, but there's attachments and stories and all those sorts of things in play. So when that finally all dissolved, I remember waking up the next morning feeling like this sense of freedom. And suddenly I was a big open slate with so many options and possibilities. Because I had been doing this meditation practice regularly even before that point, I think it just, all of those factors combined, it left me very available. And I recall this one night just connecting in and meditating, and I put this call out there. And this is why intention is so important, right? For anyone who's wondering how to
Absolutely.
actually, it is this simple. So I remember just almost, it was, I don't want to say desperate, but just really open to whatever's out there. I just want to be a part of it. And I put this call out there and said, whatever you want, I'm ready to be in service, I'm ready to step up. And instantly it was that was when my first channeling experience happened, when I say channeling, telepathic contact. And that's how it started. So it was me, just weeks after going through this big life experience, suddenly deciding that, okay, I want to find purpose and meaning in my life. Okay, great, what does that look like? I don't know. So I just put it out there. Next thing I know, the very first group that connected with me with the Mayan elders, they said, hi, we are the Mayan elders. Boom, like whole transmission comes through,
Nice.
and
Yeah.
then it was the Arcturians and the Pleiadians, and then Ashtar, and many, many other races since then.
Yeah, the Octurians are definitely amazing healers. Have you experienced the med beds?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
they're
That's
amazing.
one of the things that in Origin Activation, when I created my modality, they said that I could share that technology with my students. So I take my students on there, but also I teach them how to access it for their clients as well, because it's a facilitator's training. So they learn how to access those med beds for various types of healings and whatever needs to occur in that space.
Beautiful, beautiful. And so what are your thoughts around, or how do you experience them in terms of what they look like? And do you notice any difference between the different, shall we say, personalities or types? I mean, obviously they're going to be different individual beings and they'll have their own unique, but is there any like overarching personality within the different types or races? What's your experience?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I want to say is I didn't really see them for a while.
Yes.
So the first perceptions I had of them were this telepathic contact, and a lot of the time they would just say, "We are the Arcturians," or "I am Pleiadian Elmira," or "We are the Mayan elders," whoever that is that's coming through. So they would just tell me, and I guess that's a level of I don't know if you call it claircognizance or clairaudience, because it was kind of like a knowing, but sort of also a hearing, but not like hearing
Combination.
on hearing. So a
Yeah.
bit of both. So a lot of clair senses coming in there. So I had this awareness, and then actually, because I'm quite a visual person, I had a lot of color frequencies. And so immediately one of the first things that I noticed was that each race has a very specific color frequency. And it's something I laugh about now, because there's Pleiadian blue, and there's Arcturian blue, and there's Ashtar blue, and there's just so many shades of blue, even just in the galactic races. And then you've got, like, for example, the Lyrans, who come through in more of this like creamy yellow white frequency that is very, very distinct. So from that perspective, yes, I feel they have very specific vibrational characteristics that are unique to each race. And then, of course, personality wise, yeah, every being has a different personality. And I actually was quite surprised at how lighthearted and humorous many of them are. Even Ashtar, like, we'll just joke around sometimes, and you think that, as a commander, he's all like serious and that, and it's just they're very human like in that sense, in that they
Mm.
laugh, they joke, they play. And they always say to me as well that the lightness, it brings up the vibration. They always tell me to be more joyful, dance more, sing more, just be lighter in life in general, instead of taking everything so seriously. So yeah, they all have their unique personalities. And then there are also distinct physical features, which I discovered a bit later on down the track, because I didn't really get faces and that for a very long time. And I'm also very aware that sometimes beings will connect in the way that they know you will appreciate.
Yes.
So for example, they when I did eventually start seeing stuff, a lot of them would come through in a more humanoid kind of form, because they know that that's how we're able to connect with them. So, even if some of them have slightly unique characteristics, like they might have webbed feet, or their heads look different, or they're blue in color, I noticed that at the start, sometimes they would change their appearance a little bit in the transmission, just to be a bit more relatable.
Well, and I think that's a good effort in sort of helping us to decouple from the fear related to it, right? Related to the
Yes.
differences, because that's definitely something that we all need to work towards in terms of when they come down, is how do we decouple the fear? Because our media has, in terms of movies and stuff, have really painted a picture of the negative side, right? That all of them are negative, and it's not like that at all. And so we really need to decouple the fear that that's created with the experience. Um, I think that's going to really help with the diplomacy piece, as we,
Mm.
the more we can reduce the fear. And I think that's a big part of what you're doing in what you're in your work in terms of that.
Well, this is it. I think that releasing of fear is absolutely pivotal to having a peaceful, open contact. And the media does play such a big role in that. One of the visions that I have been holding on to for a little while, haven't had a chance to action yet, but it just keeps coming through, is a film that essentially it plays out the story of this peaceful contact in the way that it's supposed to be played out. Now, from a drama perspective, I can tell you it's not going to, you know, get the super high ratings for having all the drama, but that's kind of what we need. We don't need more drama in our lives. I think we have enough of that, to be honest. And I think, you know, media, because it does play such a big role in the shaping of consciousness, if we can get this film out there for open contact that outlines the pathway, there's an element of creation that comes into it. I mean, we're going into a little bit of, you know, consciousness theory, which is that your thoughts influence the world around you, and your thoughts carry a vibration. So when you have millions of people watching the story of the aliens landing and everything's chaotic and it's doomsday, and that kind of seeds things in the creation, and I'm very, very mindful of that. So I think what needs to happen is for that story to be rewritten in a much more peaceful way that may not have dramatic value from a film perspective, but it is going to shape the consciousness in a way that is going to help us create that peaceful outcome through millions of people watching this film, actually putting their minds, their energy towards this particular type of outcome that we can then co-create as a human race through our collective consciousness.
And I think that Avatar has played a role in that.
Yes.
That's such a beautiful, beautiful movie series. I think that that has had a lot of dramatic value. You know, a lot of uh, people have seen that movie and really appreciated the background that goes into that. And so I think that is a beautiful idea for a movie. So if anyone
If
watching is
anyone knows any
interested,
directors and actors,
exactly, exactly.
I would love to make this project happen. It's been sitting there for a while. So maybe this conversation, maybe somebody will watch this and they'll reach out and go, "Hey, Eesha, I've got the perfect team of people for you who can help you make this vision come to life." I'm very open to that.
Beautiful. So we'll put that out there in the consciousness, see what happens. So what else would you like to discuss today in terms of what your projects are? Is there something else you'd like to bring forward?
I think the biggest thing is just for people to start understanding the various races, and to also start understanding the mechanisms by which contact happens. You know, there are still a lot of skeptics out there who think that it's all just made up. Or people lump it into this belief category, like it's somehow something religious, you know? And I think, well, there's a really big difference between belief and knowing. I know that I've made contact. I don't believe that they exist. I know that they exist. And for some people, it's almost unfathomable because it's just so far out of their reality. They think, well, you know, okay, I understand that they might believe that, but I have nothing to base that off. And so I think what really needs to happen from here is more conversations like this around how can we be teaching people how to initiate contact for themselves so that they can then have their own experiences, because that takes away the skepticism. I mean,
It
real
does.
life experience is going to take that away completely. Once you've experienced and met the being, well, that's it. Skepticism gone, you know?
It's true.
And I think it's really around the messaging to incentivize people to do that. And of course, there's always going to be some people that are going to, you know, wait till everyone else has done it and then suddenly they may or may not come on board. You know, there are still people out there that believe things that have been scientifically proven otherwise. So you're always going to get that. But I think for the majority of the population, I think if there's enough evidence, if there are enough tools out there, processes, and enough motivation and incentive to adopt them, then that's how we're going to create the progress. Because beyond talking about it is actually taking action. And I think that's where the real magic is. We can sit here and talk about, you know, ETs all day, every day, but at the end of the day, it's the onus is on each individual to make that intention and that decision upon themselves to go, you know what, I'm going to explore this. Are you skeptical? Great, cool. Be your own scientist. Sit down in meditation every day for 6 months and you tell me if it works, right? I guarantee that it will. So it's just one of those things where people need to move. And I think just across the board, the needle does need to move from theory into practice. And I see this across the entire ufology space. I see it in many, many communities where there are lots of great conversations around this. And I think added to that is time to be taking more action as well.
I agree. And I think our science needs to catch up a little bit in some of their stuff. They're getting there. We're getting a lot more, you know, ways to measure and provide proof, as they say, in terms of that. But I think a lot of the problem is that our science is limited to our knowledge, and so it's difficult if we don't accept it as knowledge before, in order to actually accept the science, right? It's kind of a chicken and an egg thing there. We have to believe it enough to create the science and the measurement tools and the proof to move into belief. So for those people that require that sort of scientific aspect of things anyways. So
Yeah, exactly.
awesome. Well, it has been a true honor having you on here today, Eesha. We thank you. Thank you so much for joining us on Bridge to the Galaxy, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Tanys.
Thank you.